Welcome to the live stream, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host today, Bumpy McSquigums. I am joined by Cupogoodness and the Tiny Disaster. We are collectively a part of the Indie Brothers, and today we're doing our game industry discussion on lessons learned from the game dev trenches. How are you two doing on this day?
Pretty well, yeah. How's it going over there, Bumpy?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Sleepy today. Had a hard time getting to sleep last night.
Definitely a sleepy Wednesday. It's raining outside and like kind of windy, so
Yeah,
I feel that because
cold
it's
here
been
today,
nice.
which is
It had been nice, yeah. So
and a tiny disaster is a bit more not
playing
browbeaten
hurt,
but beaten down
playing
today.
hurt today.
Subdued.
Recovering from wisdom teeth removal, which is an
Always
intense procedure. I think all three of us have been through it. So
it's always fun.
It's going better than expected. Just sore.
yeah, and yes, accurate. It's always like, oh, that wasn't as bad, but ouchies. And I totally understand that.
But
yeah,
part of my face is gone now.
Medicine important, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, this was an interesting topic. We wanted to kind of just give some of our, I guess, personal stories about our times and trials and tribulations in the game industry. We all come from obviously different walks. A Tiny Disaster basically having a more recent move over to the game industry than Bumpy and I, who've been in there like working. Not that you've been not involved in games at all, Tiny Disaster, but I suppose, is that accurate to say?
I'm not sure, when did Bumpy get into the industry?
Well, Bumpy's been into the industry since his
almost
YouTube channel started,
years.
which was a long time. Yeah, almost a decade ago. And I'm not. I was just trying to like frame it for all of us because I know you were basically in a completely different industry until recently.
Oh, yeah.
I think with the books and stuff. With your books, with your book and your reading and all that.
A transition. I worked in publishing, marketing, writer stuff, and then worked on a game for writers. So, and I did that for, I think, I want to say 3 years or so before being.
And there's a lot of opportunities for that crossover, I think, in those two mediums we're talking about, especially if you have, if you have writing as part of your tool set, marketing, etc. So that's kind of where I found myself right originally in the industry, was that I found that there was a gap, that there's these indie developers that made really good games, but they did not want to spend time promoting them. They didn't want to put themselves out there and promote themselves or their games. And therefore, there were many indie games that weren't reaching the levels that they could have reached. And this was, obviously going back to when there wasn't a gluttony of content out there. It was pretty limited, and still some really good games were not on the radar for various reasons. And like back then, one of the main reasons was if you were on Steam or not, back in the PC days, because a lot of indies, most indies, everybody thinks kind of indies like were invented in like the 2010s. This is not true. That's when they got kind of their fad, that fad of that we always talk about the indies were just very in during that time. That's because consoles started to allow indies to bring their games over to their platforms via digital distribution most of the time, which was obviously a huge factor for indies to get their games on other platforms other than PC, which was naturally digital distribution in most cases. Although if you go back, I'm sure there were CD-ROMs of indie developers, dating back to like the early 90s and late 80s and things of that sort, and like floppy disks and things of that sort. So PC indies have been around like forever. Like as long as games have been around, PC indie developers have been around, and that's just because the computer allows you to make the game on the platform that you're going to be playing it on, essentially. Like whereas the consoles are just a completely different beast, and there was no digital distribution back then. This is all to say that eventually, as this sort of corner of the industry was solidified and then started to grow, and more importantly, just regular Joes like myself and Jane's started to actually see indies as like a viable option to play. Like, oh, this is a fun thing that's not a highly produced or AAA developed game, but it's still really enjoyable to play. We've talked about this before, why indies kind of stand out versus AAAs in certain cases, and I think this is one of the first like things that where the fad started taking place. It's like, oh, look at it, it's a stripped down experience. It's just about the mechanics. Really, a lot of times, like the art is a lot of times good enough or passable, but it's really about the game itself. And because it's one developer or a couple of developers, they can kind of carve out a lot of focused gameplay that a lot like bigger teams just don't get a chance to do and iron out and really hit it in a great way. And so you have all these, indies start popping out, but as they come out, you realize that like a lot of these developers are like really heavily introverted, and they're really just not interested in doing interviews that much. Indies were cool because they would work with me and do interviews with me, but it would usually be like over email. They very often didn't want to do a voice or a video chat. And so you kind of learned, oh man, there's these folks that are really into, creating these amazing experiences, looking to make them commercial, sell them, but they struggle with the elements of putting it out there, pushing it out there, and putting themselves out there. So that's where I personally found kind of my opportunity to, like fill a gap and actually form some sort of career path in games beyond, at the time I was a games like reporter and writer and kind of just covering news and such. But just like being a YouTube content creator or a Twitch streamer, unless you're at the top echelon of that, that's not going to be paying the bills most of the time. So it was either, continue with side gigs, side jobs, side hustles within and without the industry, or, try to start carving paths and making connections with developers and working through them. And that's kind of where I started to, become the marketing person or the PR person or the community person for Arcen Games originally, and then eventually other studios after that, as we got into the pre-Indie Bros and then early Indie Bros days as we worked for various developers. And so that, I just want to give like an impression on where I'm coming from as a where I'm not a programmer. I'm very rarely in that area of the design and development of the game. I do have experience basically in every other elements every other element of game development, but not in the programming sense. So a lot of things like with me in the trenches, I think about like how I'll talk to my developer. This has happened multiple times across multiple studios, but Arcen's a great example because Arcen works like with the idea of iterative design. So they're going to work on something. They're going to come up with a design, right? They're going to come up with an idea. They're going to work on it. They're going to take the hammer to it and build it out. And then eventually they're going to see if that's actually good or not. And if it's not good, they're going to make pivots and adjustments. And these could be major changes. These could be like, scrapping entire, mechanics for other mechanics. And so I imagine, right, from the programmer standpoint, you're going to want to be sort of ready for those pivots, to go down proverbial dead ends sometimes, knowing that you still gained experience from going down those proverbial dead ends, and then iterate from there and build to down, another way. Doesn't mean you always have to pivot in such a dramatic way. A lot of times it might be just small adjustments to make the gameplay really pop. Chris Park, the lead developer of Arcen, said we need to take it from, we have it at bubble wrap popping fun right now, which is not what we need it to be ultimately. Bubble wrap popping fun is going to be fun for a little bit, but not like for a long-term enjoyment of a for a player for a game. It needs to be taken to a further state than that bubble wrap state.
I remember as part of what you're talking about right now. From what I read, it was an article or something that Arcen had put out, that the original gameplay loop where he actually controlled stuff, he did the combat and everything else, was designed as more of a roguelike experience, like a bullet hell, like a Binding of Isaac. And they ended up going away from that because it didn't really fit the tone or what they were trying to do in the game. But they kept that as like okay, we have this built out, ready to go, and then that later became Star Wars Rogue, while they, like you said, pivoted and changed and iterated what they wanted to do for the last Federation. So that actually spawned two different games in the same realm from working on just the one game. So that's kind of a good example of what you were talking about.
And we just really buy into, the idea that that's the right way to go about it, right? Like, I think it's a better way to go about it than a more rigid sense, this was the original design, and so we're going to stick with this all the way through. And then you have potentially what we would call I guess at least a higher percentage chance to have that mixed review, mid-lean, game that doesn't really do much. It doesn't score well with the Steam users, and just can't really get off of the ground because more or less because the market isn't really into it. It might have been good as a concept or on paper, but as you go through, you need to be really honest and be like, okay, wait, this is actually not that fun. Like, we need to make an adjustment here because games are ultimately supposed to be an enjoyable, thing, or at least you could feel that pull for progress, right? Like, it's like, oh, I want to keep playing. I want to further progress through this. I think that's a really important part, in as you're trying to, realize your design from, practice or paper to practice. So that's definitely something from like a marketing perspective. It's more like you sit in a room and you talk about all these ideas and how these things are going to happen. And then you go, okay, forget about that. Like, it's like a few months later, you're like, well, actually forget about all that. It's going to be completely different now. And now the development is going to be longer than we thought. And so that's something that you have to be kind of okay with too, is that you're like, oh, originally we talked about this being probably about like a 6 to 9 month thing, but lo and behold, it's turned into closer to 2 years. Like, that's, and not just like in one foul swoop, but in 3, 4, 5 different, pivots, iterations, etc. So like, I mean, as far as like financially planning TD, that is wow. You know what I mean? Like that's a huge difference, right? So that's why a lot of that's why a lot of developers will say this is a tough gig. That's why a lot of people will be like, oh, you should never become an indie developer and stuff like that, because there's a lot of, you could only be so prepared. I mean, you can only have so much financial backing, right? Like, a lot of times, in a lot of cases, right? If you're privileged, you might be able to say, okay, if this goes from 9 months to 24 months, no big deal. But that's not going to be the case for most people, right? So, like, there's a lot going on there that, you have to take consideration on. And so what's the balance on it? Are you going to say, no, we're going to stick to our, our schedule and release something? And if it's not good enough, then so be it. You see that with some developers too. I think we've talked about that before, Bumpy. It's like they're just kind of plowing through whether or not they actually find the solid gameplay. There's some publishers that are like, oh, this is the genre that we're just going to pump and pump and pump. Like, just so many different kind of games. And simulation, I'm not going to name any names, but simulation is full of this right now. So I feel like, and so anyway, go ahead.
What you were just talking about, though, your budget's running out, and sometimes it's got to be a mediocre game or no game at all. So
I feel like there's some developers that are more manipulative with it, and it's like it's not necessarily like hurting their bottom line, but rather it's just their business approach. Like, it's just the way they practice.
Why invest more money in excellent if you can make enough money with fine?
And there is an argument to say the more you can iterate and release new products on Steam, the more opportunities you have for success, versus say spending 3 to 5 years on a magnum opus, and then it just doesn't work out, like, which is very likely to happen. Like, I mean, like, more than 50% of a chance for that to happen, unless you are really connected, really plugged in, have really good release hype, all these things that you just won't know necessarily unless you, again, already know, I guess, or can find a way to make that happen, which people have, but it's not something that is commonly done. So it's a thing. It's definitely a thing to keep in mind. As my dog just chews on my shoe. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's like it's like a lot of times it's the outside looking in, because I'm not in the place where they're making the meat, or so to speak. I'm sort of in the building over, and they come out and there's blood all over their aprons, and they're like, hey, we got to make some changes, and you're like, what? Oh, okay. And that's where my perspective is a lot of times is like, okay, We had A, B, and C planned for marketing beats over the next 3 months, and those are now out the window. Not necessarily out the window, but they're not happening in the next 3 months. Like they're going to be changed to different, times on the schedule at best, and at worst, they're going to get scrapped because they have nothing to do with what were maybe something that we were focused on before because something's changed the art style, the mechanics, something like that we were like, okay, this is what this is going to be about, and now it's completely different. So it's like, okay, we have to rethink this now. So that's something that from the marketing side, I'm pretty used to. Now in 2022, as a producer / production manager, I feel like I have a better grasp on all of this stuff, right? All of these things that are going to happen, these hiccups, and it's just like water off of a duck's back now when something like a delay happens, or we have to make a pivot or something like that. It's like, no, I was expecting this. When the game totally releases on time and everything goes to plan, it's like, what the heck just happened? Like that never happens. So this through the years of experience, you just come to realize that there's going to be hiccups up to the disaster potential level that you may have to, endure. It's an endurance contest a lot of times. Battle of attrition is a great way to describe getting through game development as well, because a lot of times that attrition is your scope of the game. You're like, oh, I've got all these great ideas, but as the battle of attrition takes place, you're like, I got to cut these out. If it's going to be a good game and I'm going to be able to actually complete it and ship it and in a really quality form, some of this stuff has to go. Maybe entirely, maybe it gets pushed to DLC, maybe it gets pushed to another game, etc. But that has to be kind of considered, throughout it as well. And that's something that I think you do learn in the game dev trenches, that stuff comes up all the time. Sorry, I'm taking a deep breath here and taking a little drink.
You dance with the dog there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
something
didn't kick him. It was a different thing that I kicked. It was not a living animal, I promise.
No, I said dance, not kick. Well, now we know he kicked the dog. No, I'm kidding.
I did like a sweep of because he brought what was it, a plastic clothes hanger over. He loves chewing on those things. So,
that's one of the things I have heard a lot from developers or see them. They're like, oh, we're releasing a game and it's been like years, and they're like, all right, well, we're having to cut out certain chapters. It just doesn't flow right, and it's always one of those things. Specifically, like I like strategy games, like tactical turn-based strategy. So it's weird to me to see like stuff like that getting cut out, because I feel like that doesn't seem like it would be that much extra work, or like why would that have to be cut? But I suppose maybe from a balancing perspective and things of that nature, it's too hard to get all the battles right,
Yeah, from my perspective, you're hoping at its best that it's just something that doesn't work in practice, but it sounded good. It's just as you think, you're like, oh, this isn't working, and maybe like you said, it's OP. Just upsets the balance of whatever this is, and it
too many of the same type of levels in a row or something. So
it blands it out and makes it sort of, or ease it out a little bit. And obviously there's, you have to trust developers on those choices a lot of times, right? You have to say they know what's best. It's their project, and 99% of developers aren't out to self-sabotage. No. So it's one of those things that I agree, and that's the age we're living in, because you want to push marketing early, right? You want to push a lot of this stuff out, a lot of info drops and marketing beats early. But, how sure are you that things aren't going to, take major pivots in certain areas that you're pushing out there? And what does that mean in terms of your community's reception of those changes? Super important to worry about, I think, be concerned about, be aware of in 2022 as we push forward here, into this next decade. So I think you got to be really focused on that.
You're right too. Even beyond just cutting content, so to speak, it's a few of the developers said, next game that I make, it's going to be much smaller. It's going to be a much smaller scope, much smaller scale, because I've been doing this for 5, 10, however many years they're trying to create this game, and it's just too big. They want more of a bite-sized game, and then I don't know if to build from that or learn from that or what, but
Right. And I feel like this is, and this is not to be an insult, but rather just the facts, is that a lot of times the first big project you do as a commercial developer, it's coming from like an immature place, thinking that you can just do this massive undertaking. And so you're like, it's the difference between being an immature developer and a mature developer, knowing essentially when to rope yourself in, when to say this scope is sort of out of whack. It's gone beyond what is possible to do reasonably, not just what's possible to do at all. Of course, things are possible to do in most cases, but is it reasonable to expect that to get done? I, as like an immature developer designer, have an idea about like Fallout, like kind of like a really deep RPG, which just has way too much to it for me, myself, or a small team to ever pull off and stuff. At least I kind of know that, at least. But that's like where my head goes when I want to make my first game, Bumpy. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. My daughter's calling me, so I'm going to go on mute for a moment. I'll have you two talk, and I'll just jump back on as soon as I understand. Sure. She's upstairs. She's in the house, so I just need to see what's going on with her.
Sure. Yeah, the first, I don't know if I say the first game I'd want to make, but if I had my way of making, there's a few games I have ideas for, but again, most of those have to do with licensing, and I want teams that are already making games to make a specific game. So it's like, but no, for me, I guess Cup kind of went through his start of like how he started and where he went and why he did what he did. Well, I was immigrating into Canada, and that, Canada apparently hates Americans. It took way too long. They just like 5-year delay and so on and so forth. So I was unable to work or do anything during that time. So I was volunteering at a radio station for a while, got to learn some editing skills for, sound files and such. I had a radio show for about a year, Saturday evenings. I got to do the music, I find the music, I write the show, voice the show, do all that stuff. So I got a little experience in like production of a show and all that. And then I started kind of watching YouTube stuff, and I was like, this is ridiculous. Who's going to watch videos of people playing games? That makes no sense. And then I'm like, oh, I guess I sort of kind of get it now. But then I started looking around, and I'm like, almost everyone that does this is just bad at it. Like, they're not actually good at playing the games. Not all of them are terrible, but they're just not that good at playing the game. So I was like, by and large, in general, I'm fairly good at almost everything I play. So why don't I'm playing games anyway. Why not just bring people along for the experience? And, hopefully just the fact that I'm better than average might actually be something that people care about. Nope, they don't. They don't care if you're good at the game. That's not a thing that anyone cares about. So that's why everyone's true. Terrible at it.
It turned into eventually like, personalities, obviously, to some extent, of course.
Yeah.
But your channel was built off of, I think, a clean, informative video that you provided. I think a lot of times.
Oh yeah, I was tired of all those
no nonsense, right?
Like all that stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah, and not just clean as in your language, but clean as in like it's a really clean experience. Like you go in, pretty much what you're going to be getting from beginning to end. There's really no nonsense about it, and you get the gameplay and your thoughts about that gameplay up front, and it's 20 minutes, and then you bounce on to the next one if you like the series, if there is a series in your case, if you build them out, because a lot of times you'll do one-offs too.
Yeah,
which makes sense for a lot of games.
That's one of those scope versus actual thing. Like anything that I start as an episode 1, I really like the game, or at least I like where the game's at when I'm starting to play it. I'm enjoying my time, and I always want to play more. It's just I don't have the time to do that. So it's like so many times I'm like, oh well, there's another series that's never gonna get finished. Oh, there's another one that I can't do. So it's sometimes I circle back after a few weeks or a few months. Sometimes it's been years. I came back, finished a game. It's like, so it can be infuriating and frustrating at times. So I mean, I've learned you can't please everyone. I mean, I learned that from just throughout my YouTube stuff, but I even in the doing stuff for Indie Brothers, you're not always going to be able to please everyone, no matter how hard you try, what you do, or even what you feel was, that was about the best possible scenario you can get. It's still terrible. I don't like, how this worked out. So yeah, it's, I guess tempering expectations, understanding, things aren't necessarily going to go exactly how you want them to go, and the outcome might not be exactly what you expect. So
one thing I want to riff off there that you and I talked about, I think off camera a couple nights ago, Bumpy, is the viral nature of what we do. In most avenues of the industry, you're trying to get essentially some part of your content at some point to go bigger than the rest of your content, so to speak, like or multiple times, of course, over the your career, and that is so hard to do, and it is so demoralizing to just kind of have to go through that process again and again and again. I obviously do that as a game developer now, but before, when I was a games writer, I was telling Bumpy about this. We had to like submit to just random TD, you might know about these, like random like portals, like not quite social media, but sites that would boost your articles and give you additional views through aggregate, additional websites and things like that. And so, it was like, oh, okay, I got to get my article ready. But also there's this whole additional process of submitting the article to the site called Infor.G, which is going to have like the first couple dozen people look at it, and if they voted up enough, it'll get to like 60 degrees, which they're doing like a degrees thing or whatever. And so that will get to the front page, and then it will get way more exposure. And my article, instead of getting like 10 to 30 views, will get like hundreds of views. And it's just this game you play all the time for exposure, for validation of existence. Like it really doesn't matter what area of the games industry I think you're talking about. Like I think everybody has that battle in front of them. Like has to do something, like has to like look that in the face and be like, I've got to figure out what the plan is to at some point have these things go big. On Bumpy's side, he's constantly looking at like the popularity of things. Not that like that's his main choice, but he knows which games are supposed to be the ones to pop, so to speak, have the most kind of viewership. And he's constantly telling me how it's like, and that didn't work at all, and that's so stupid. Like, you know what I mean?
That should have been really big for me, and it fell flat.
Right, and it's just, and so those are some of the experiences that you take on, especially as you're developing, your career, as you're getting started and or not even getting started, but years deeper into it. And that's something that even developers at Vertigo, who the Cooks Are Delicious developers, they have a game that sold over 1 million copies, etc. That doesn't mean we're like exempt from these challenges, and that we still have to face them moving forward. And we know we have the advantages, and we're going to leverage those advantages full on, because absolutely as a business you have to do that. But I think that's where it starts, is like an understanding that there's an uphill battle when you get into your job with the games industry, and like you have to be willing to endure. It's just what I was told in Hollywood, but I never really stuck with, because I really just hated jumping through the loops of the acting and the writing down there. But they said if you hang around here for 5 to 10 years in the job, everybody who's competing with you will disappear. They're just not going to be here anymore. Like 9 out of 10 people that are like in this industry, and the reason why is that it's tough, is that it's challenging, and a lot of people are like, you know what, I give up. I don't want to do this anymore, because I just can't keep going down this path. And it's not like maybe they lose faith. Maybe they actually just are not having fun with it anymore, which completely makes sense to me. Like there are amazing reasons to pivot out of every job we've talked about today. Like it's like no doubt. Yeah. Like if you want, it's kind of like up to you, right? Like for me, it's like I do like having enough money to get by, but I'd rather not have to go to an office 9 to 5, work a job that I don't like, to get enough to just have like extra money or that kind of stuff. I'd rather just fight it out on the indie side and have the life I have. I've been in goblin mode for too long here at my house. Like I don't think I do well in an office anymore. So, but I honestly think like 9 to 5 in an office stresses me hard in a way that, and tires me, and stress leads to kind of exhaustion for me at this point. So I think the best approach for me is to kind of like say, this is just where I'm at right now. What makes me happy, ultimately, right? Like, I think that's what's important. Are there some traps with it? Yeah. Like, I mean, I think that's true for any career path you take. Once you start going down it, it's harder to get out of it in certain ways, because you've invested so much into it. So there is that, but at this point, I'm like, what else would I be doing that I would be happier doing? And I can't come up with it. So that's at least a good sign for me.
Yeah. So from the thing to remember from a content creator's standpoint is, while yeah, I'm frustrated. Oftentimes numbers aren't where they should be. I've been doing this for however many years. You have to take into account, even where I'm at, 99% probably still, like almost every single person that steps into the arena falls short and won't even make it to my level, which is not even that impressive when you look at some of the others. So I'm still very grateful. I mean, I can't eat or pay bills with the games that I get from developers and publishers and PR folk, but hundreds of dollars a month basically get sent my way to do some sort of coverage on. I mean, it doesn't exactly factor into, this is your income, but it does. There's something to that, And it's allowing me to do way more than I'd ever be able to do just as a gamer myself, having to pay thousands of dollars every year for stuff that I'm getting now to cover and share and showcase with my community. So I'm still in a very, very awesome and privileged spot, and I don't take it for granted. And a lot of people, I guess they don't get that, or they maybe forget that, and that's why they get super angry all the time, or they just quit because
being grateful can be tough when you go through the long-term, kind of pushes and maybe you get a little jaded, towards some of the stuff that happens. I think it's a great point that it's like kind of a general thing that I've seen before, is that you'll always be looking at someone and being like, man, like they're, whether you look up to them or just their success, you're like, man, they're at a place where I'm just not. And I'm just kind of here, I guess, like it sucks. And then there's someone behind you doing the exact same thing, being like, man, they're in some place that I'm just not. I really think that they're terrific and fantastic. And I think that's true for a lot of us, is that there's a lot of us out there that we're not satisfied with where we're at, but we should be grateful at times to take the time to be grateful for that, because we are in positions that a lot of people really admire and like strive to be in. And like, so that's really cool. Like, that's a really cool place to be, because I think, I think that the grind can put you in a headspace sometimes where it's tougher to appreciate that.
Sure. Tiny Disaster, I know you're trying to do some tweeting and giving your mouth a rest. Did you want to share any specific instances that you've learned over the past year and a half that you've been with us?
I have like rapid fire ones that have been very, I don't know, Cup also mentioned talking about some like show stories and stuff that I'm not even sure we're going to reach in this chat, because we've barely scratched the surface. We're halfway there. So maybe just some kind of quicker ones from me for now. Coming from the social media side, start coming from working on social media myself, basically running the show for that game versus like consulting for other developers and kind of getting into what their headspace is. I think one of the first things I learned was that my perception of social media is very different from a lot of developers in terms of just understanding where general social media literacy is with the amount of different platforms. Of like every developer I meet, very up on Twitter. Everywhere else, And they have a lot of like preconceived ideas about what TikTok is and who the audience is, or who's using Instagram, or how relevant Facebook still is. So because I am on social media a lot, I had a very baseline of like, oh, people understand what the different platforms are and a general sense of how to use them. And I found kind of two different sides of it. Some developers have not touched platforms, but still assume social media, very easy. I could just jump in, know exactly what I'm doing. Or they're too intimidated in the other direction. And like, oh, I cannot do that. I have no idea how to make video content, or just coming up with content ideas and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So finding that balance of it's not as easy or as hard as anybody thinks it is.
Right.
Has been kind of the interesting lesson learned there. The other one, and the kind of the battle I'm always willing to face at this point, or ready to face coming into any new consultation, is that nobody wants to put their face on social media. And it is basically my job to talk them into doing it anyway.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I know that like David for Vertigo leads with his avatar a lot. Like he wants his avatar to be used as like the promotional thing, and his avatar is like his face, but you know, in a cartoon kind of drawing form. So, like, there's ways to mitigate if you have some people that are like really against that, or ways to like kind of balance it out, right? Like, and find a way to.
You never have to, but you're always putting yourself at a disadvantage.
It's beneficial to do so, right? Yeah. For sure. I mean, that's a great point. I think Bumpy, and TD can all speak to the experience of working with different developers and discovering different personalities, expectations, approaches to business, approaches to collaboration. You know, when I first started, you know, kind of connecting with developers and, you know, sort of we're laying everything out there in terms of what's going to get done and how we're working together. It's a really, you know, the thing I learned was, you know, don't promise too much, you know, obviously, but also make sure it's clear what the expectations are. Don't be vague, or don't allow the conversation to stay vague, right? Like, it's not necessarily anyone's fault, but maybe both sides just don't iron it out enough. And then that's going to cause problems down the line because there's going to be, you know, mixed up expectations on each side that they're not aligned. So I find that
a year ago or so with probably just Ryabi and I talking about how Indie Bros is very much an amplifier for what a game already has, but a lot of developers are looking for a magic ticket, basically, of I'm going to hire a marketing firm and they're going to make me go viral and my game is going to pay all my bills now and it will all be wonderful. And of course, that is our dream also, but that's not always a realistic expectation. And understanding what the standard expectation is, what is realistic, what is possible, has been an interesting balancing act as we start to work with developers and all of that.
That's that's exactly the same. It's kind of the carrot dangled in front of you, you know. At any moment, any video I do could potentially blow up, and boom, I'm off to the races, essentially, so to speak. So it's the same situation. It seems that's kind of like anywhere something can go viral or just blow up, and immediately, you know, things change. Everything changes. Everything's set in stone, and you're good. So.
And a lot of this, like, it felt very familiar coming from publishing for content creation, for games, for books. It's all an art in some way, and something that people who are creating it feel so passionately about and want to share that passion with people and want to find the right audience.
Right.
And love the thing that they are trying to put out into the world. And so coming from the marketing perspective, where it's our job to look at it with a little more nuance, a little more distance, and help find the right path forward. It's a tricky line to walk in terms of how everybody is seeing what is happening at any given moment.
Yeah, that passion can be a great point of leverage, though. A lot of times, like, it's really great to be able to see that a developer like is really just, you know, putting their all into a project, wanting it to be the best possible thing. Like, that is a great. It doesn't mean that it's like a magic bullet again, but it is a great bedrock to be working with the developer on, knowing that, hey, when I promote this thing, I know that the person who's behind it, or the people that are behind it, have really endeavored to make a quality product, and that's going to make my job easier as I try to promote it. Also, reputation wise, it's going to make me look, you know, like, good. I don't want to work with bad products ultimately. Like, I think that's an important thing that you think about as well. Like, it's a little different on Bumpy's side because a part of his job is to critique. So if he gets a bad game, it's not the end of the world. Like, his reputation isn't hurt by critiquing a bad game. You know, but working directly with a game that, when I say bad, I mean, you know, ill-advised to release commercially, asking kind of a rip-off in terms of asking for money for something that's maybe just not the amount that it's worth, that kind of thing. You know, for the most part, you know, I try to consider that when we're working with developers, and you know, obviously you want to consider every opportunity that's viable, or that seems like a reasonable thing that you'd want to do. But at the same time, you don't want to just find yourself in a situation a few months down the road being like, this is not great. It's icky, or something's just, you know, I'm trying to sell something that I personally don't believe in, which is the worst thing I think from a marketing perspective to feel like.
Yeah, I've actually seen us turn down a few opportunities. Going back to what we were saying about, anything could explode or blow up at any time. You get into a weird middle ground, and I think it's important what the Tracy brothers here is saying. I'll read it in a second. Because you get to a point where you've been doing it for so long, and again, at any moment, things can change, but at what point are you at that sunken cost fallacy versus legitimate, there's going to be something for you down the line? It's a weird middle ground you walk, but I think, and what the couple's saying, that if you have passion about what you're doing, if you're enjoying what you're doing, and you're okay with where you're at, and you can set smaller goals, it's going to be okay. And what the Tracy brothers say over here is, when thinking about metrics of success, how popular you are versus other people is less important, which is very true, than what your numbers allow you to do, such as pay bills, pay a bill, pay the bills, go full time, expand and grow. If you get too focused on the numbers and not goals, you end up not doing the right work to get what you really want. And that's very true. It's not, oh, I just need a game or a game, or in my case, a video that's massively huge, and then my number's going to go up, and that's great for that one video or that one series maybe, but then am I going to get locked into a specific series forever, and that's all people are ever going to watch? There's a lot of caveats on that on my end, and I know same thing with developers. They get known for a specific series. Sometimes they're fine. They want to live in that series and branch it out and build in a whole entire universe. Other times they're like, I just wanted to make one game like this, but this is what people expect from me now. So
How natural.
So much, especially in early days of TikTok, but still now that unless you're very niche down and only making one kind of content, so often you'll make just a random video. I made one about going into a sewing store and some lady being rude to me, and that is still my most successful TikTok video to date. I have no interest in making sewing content.
Right.
I have a friend who
like to see
created
people.
a TikTok because she wanted to talk about her writing and promoting her books, and she got into talking about ADHD, and her account got way more popular for that. And she ended up making a second account and kind of rerouting things, but she didn't want to be making the ADHD content, but that was getting her views, and it's so hard not to fall into that trap and forget the audience they're looking for.
I think the most important thing is it natural to you or not? Like, if it's not natural to you, then eventually your burnout, if you think your burnout is going to be fast on something that you're passionate about, think of your burnout rate if you're doing something that you're not passionate about, but you have to do it all the time. Like, it'd be even like crazy higher. So that's something I keep in mind. Like Bumpy,
for long-term goals. Like, I could be really passionate about sewing, but I cannot put in 10 hours of content creation a week to making sewing videos. That's not going anywhere.
Right. And Bumpy and I have talked about this more with Twitch and YouTube. There are a lot of best practices that we're just like, pass. We're just not interested in doing that. It's not our natural selves to, to indulge in some of those practices, because we just don't find them.
Just examples.
I feel like if you have it's gotten to the point where they just make fun of it now. You need to have on the YouTube, you need to have a thumbnail where there's like a lawnmower or something in the background and your face being like, oh, like something like that. And you have to have a question that's a statement. Like, my babysitter ran over my dog with a lawnmower ? Something like that. Like, that sounds horrible. Like, right? Like, and so that is what I'm talking about. That right there, which is me just making up crap, would probably get more views than anything I would ever release just on how I would normally like to release content, and not like push in certain directions. Twitch, a lot of overlays, a lot of soft begging for things like follows, things like that, which I get is part of the game sometimes. With Twitch, I don't personally have an investment in raising that channel up to the highest numbers and things like that. So I have a privilege of not having to worry about. I don't mean to call it soft begging, because I think it is part of the process to say, I have this many followers, I'd like to reach this goal, I'm going to have it overlaid on my screen, etc. I'm not like hating on anybody who does that, but like, it's just not for me personally. I don't want to put, like Bumpy's points out, it gets kind of crowded on a lot of these streams in terms of like how you can just visually take a look at it without just being hit by a bunch of different statements, numbers, things like that can kind of just
Here, I'll give you guys
lessen the
a
experience.
quick idea of what we were talking about. This was an April Fool's video that I made, and it was just that stupid face and big bold letters and it's just the worst. And that's what people want. That's what they click on, and it's just awful.
Or that's what the algorithm feeds into, or whatever you want to say. Like, you know what I mean? However it works, that's the way you want to get if you go through these processes, you'll get more results almost automatically through that. There's TikTok best practices. The Chris Z, I can't remember his website. We talked about it about a month ago. The guy who does one of those indie marketing websites basically just did a short article in terms of, hey, I've talked to a few TikTok creators on this front. It seems like these are the best practices. You should do this basically every single time you release a TikTok, and you will find the algorithm at some point, and it will come across, and you'll bump it to 10K, possibly higher, like on those view counts and etc. And we let our social media guy, I think you've talked to him a few times, TD before on one of our writers for Vertigo is also our social media person. Oh, awesome. And he basically just, he never used TikTok before in any form or fashion, followed those best practices guides, and we have a bunch of, like big poppers right now for the Cook Serve Delicious series. Yes, Cook Serve Delicious allows us some content to work with, right? Like it's not like we have nothing to work with, but still, that's crazy to me that works. So that there's A, B's, and C's out there that you need to follow, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you are. If you do these things, you're likely to find that viral hit a little bit easier. And they say that TikTok is actually one of the only viable social media places to do this right now. Everything else, like Instagram, it's just too late. I mean, you can establish only to some degree now. Going viral is so much harder on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, comparably to TikTok right now. Which to me, if you talked to me about a year ago, I don't know if I would have been able to accept that. But that is what we're seeing in terms of raw data week over week as our writer and social media person continues to pull all this different data from these different, as you said, the social media literacy. We're trying to be as multilingual as possible, so to speak, and because of that, we're now like realigning what we're doing. We're like, okay, we're going to make some of these social media sites like just float. Like they're not going to have a lot of content and pipeline push into them, because ultimately it's not visually the data is not confirming that it's worth it right now. And that might change, right? That might change depending on what platforms do.
So
I think from that conversation we'd had today, I think one of my overall lesson for the day, before Bumpy inevitably asks, any final thoughts or whatever, of sometimes the most helpful lessons you learn in any level of this are the really boring ones. In the call time we were talking about TikTok, a lot of it was just like, no one else really appreciates just how important it is to trim every random breath, and like just stuff that nobody cares about. No one wants, when you're learning social media tips, no one wants to hear about that. Those things are boring, but they make a huge difference. And I'm sure in every facet of game dev, you can find those little just best practices that work consistently that nobody cares about.
Yep, it's so true. It's so true. It's like it's like the best. Sometimes the best version of things are when they're not even able to be detected by the player, so to speak. Like the best version of things is that they're elegant and that they don't get in the player's face. They don't cause the player to even consider or think about them at all. And that which normally would interrupt like the immersive effect you're going for a lot of times with games, right? Like you're trying to immerse a person into the game.
So this is one of those things that's kind of sad for me. Like watching even YouTube videos, especially heavily edited ones. And one of my issues with TikTok in general is I do notice the mini cuts. It drives me nuts. It's like, just do something in a single take. Why are you cutting 700 times? I get it. It does cut down the time, and people's attention is very, very limited, and that's what they're there for. They're on TikTok to see something in a very short form. But for me, it drives me nuts. I can't stand it. I can't stand, YouTube videos where like, I was going to the store, and you're like, oh my god, how many times did you say that one line and you used 8 different cuts for it?
That's just one form of formatting. I've seen a TikTok formatting where it's just a one cut or like a single cut
I know they do that, but
like that.
But that's one of those
learn to
best
talk
practices.
fast and get it out in one sentence.
Yeah, there you go. See, and I think that's a very viable thing. Going back to that's just one of those things. Like, I'm one of the people that noticed. No, I'm old.
Yeah,
I can't help it.
Well, you're an editor as well, right? Like you edit your videos, and so that there is that tie to it. You see things just like what I talk about with my theater major. I see things in shows and television shows that just annoy people because they're like, I just want to watch the show, dude, and stop breaking it down. You know what I mean, in such a way,
Yeah. So going back just to some other short things I've learned through working with Indie Brothers. All developers are not created. All right, all developers' needs are not created equal. They oftentimes will have different demands of you and require you to do different things. Some people are like, hey, here, hands off. You do whatever you need to do. We trust you to do it. Other people are like, all right, I want to do pretty much everything, and I'll let you do this one thing. And then they kind of like zoom in and hyper focus to make sure you're doing what you're doing right. And then they're willing to ask for help and whatnot. So it's not like anyone's a tyrant or anything, at least that I've run into. But it's just weird how some people are like, here, do this thing. And they're like, man, you did incredible. You did really great. And the other person's like, oh, cool. Thanks for doing that. And they're like, and I'm not trying to seek praise or anything, but it's interesting to see how different people react with different things. And then sometimes you have
thanks for doing your job, and that's all you get. You know what I mean?
And that's fine. Like, again, like I'm totally okay with that. It's a little bit weird to see people's like not letting go, like they're clutching their baby to them super tight, and they're like, all right, you can touch the hand. Versus the other one, here you go, hold it and run and do whatever you need to do. Yeah.
And they're like happy to see that you've added some facet to it that wasn't there before. You know what I mean? Like, again, you feel that appreciation. I totally like that a lot. And like the expectations of developers can be crazy. I feel like 9 out of 10 are not micromanagers, which is really nice for the indie space.
Yeah, mostly.
Really important. I think a lot of the indies are like, kind of shun that, sort of management style. May have been in that kind of, arena before and been like, screw that. That's why I'm indie now. So a lot of developers you talk to are in that space because of that.
There's also a level of not having time that indies, the mentality for a lot of people, like if I had to, I could figure out how to do this, but I am out of time now. I need you to handle it. Just trust that you've got it covered.
Yep. It's just interesting how some developers clearly come from a space where they were managers and they do have a little bit of a challenge delegating, or if they do delegate, they still need to have eyes on approval process, all that kind of stuff in a very specific way. Whereas, like, I feel like most developers are like, I'm super busy. I'm gonna trust your expertise, and that feels great too. It really feels nice to have that, like, sort of like, I wish I could give you like more feedback, but I just kind of have to give this to you and run with it. Of course, you'd like to have as much feedback as possible, or like info from the developer to work with, and they'll usually give you that. But after that, they're usually like, it's your thing to run with, and let's communicate, periodically and see where things are at all the time with it. And that's a wonderful place to be, I think, a lot of times, because there's a confidence in that they'll leave you to your work. They'll leave you to your expertise.
So, and the other thing that was going to go with that, also I want to say it actually vocally. Hi, Missy. Welcome to the stream.
Hey, Missy. I'll be back.
I did wave for you before. Anyhow, oftentimes you're not going to necessarily even get everything that you are going to need to do something. In my case, I do most of the streaming. So for me, ideally, we do roughly, most of the time, it's usually 2-hour streams. Sometimes it's a little bit more, occasionally it's a little bit less. So ideally, you'd have 2 hours of content for me to stream over that, or maybe an hour and a half, and then I can delay slightly. I've had it to where I've had something I could literally run through in 15 minutes that I somehow had to drag out for 2 hours. And I did repeat it and played through the demo again. And that's just one of those things that you have to be able to pivot and handle is, you need to fill this much time and you're given this much content, and you got to somehow make it stretch to where at least it makes sense to do so. So that
I've
was
had similar
scary.
on my end of like, make content for social media. We have no assets to give you.
Oh,
I'm
no.
like, okay.
Yeah, I hate that too.
It takes a hardcore brainstorm session to start coming up with like ideas when you're given none. Like you need to have.
I don't know your game. I can see the art style from the Steam page or whatever, and eventually you end up going in and recording and whatever. But started with, I have no knowledge of this and nothing to work with.
It really starts with the store page, but it's like if you can't have something playable, that holds you back for sure. Versus being able to actually, have it both, like obviously the ability to record footage, but also just to know it, like you're saying.
So, is there any final thoughts anybody wants to throw out there as we are wrapping up? And I know we pivoted earlier to change something.
No, it was good. It was good. I have a few, I have some public event stories, but they're all going to different conferences and conventions, so we can make that a different thing on a different day. I can make them 2 minutes. I can make them 10 minutes, kind of stories. So no problem on those at all, because there's some details that are interesting and funny or, relatable, so to speak. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, I'm cool with us kind of being able to riff like we did today, and just looking up, and now we're almost at time.
So next week would be adapting during game development,
which we did talk about a little.
Yeah, we talked about that for like a third of today.
I feel like that is that's oftentimes what we just covered on today. So
what we'll do is we'll just kind of look that over and see if we want to expand on that subject at all. If we do, we'll maybe make it a half and half or something like that.
All right, I'm putting it out
there. We can
also
just move things around a bit.
What about first bit of next stream? Maybe we'll keep a shorter overall goal, but first bit of next stream we have story time with Cup, and he gets to tell his tales of adventures to start us off, and then we move on to something from there.
Yeah, we could do that. I'm up for whatever, and we'll talk over the next few days. Of course, nothing has to be set in stone or decided while we're on stream. So I think we'll just figure that out, and we'll push it out on social media end of week or beginning of next week and go from there.
All right. Well, that sounds good to me. Hopefully some folks got to hear some interesting thoughts and things from several different perspectives, from Cup's myriad of jobs and positions throughout. And he's a wacky waving inflatable flailing tube band now.
I was imagining with more total arms, but yeah.
The multitude of jobs and things that he's done throughout the industry, to a tiny disaster coming from a different industry and utilizing those skills. And you said you had about 3 years of working with a game that was the game about writing. I didn't fully.
No, she was doing writing for a game, I believe. Or what were you saying specifically?
I did their social media. I did some of their writing eventually. It was a gamified RPG for writers. So they have a writing pad in the game, and you need 400 words to beat this monster. And there's quests and items and avatars.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
I hadn't heard of that one, or heard that was even a thing before. That's neat. And then from basically content creation and streaming and things of that nature. So again, a bunch of different perspectives. A lot of it kind of echoes and holds true to all different aspects and corners of the industry. So hopefully that helps someone along the way. You can always check us out here most Wednesdays. We're here doing something, chatting about something, talking about something. You can check us out at theindiebros.com. And if you have a game and you need some help getting it out there, marketing to people, we can do that. All right, I've been your host, Bumpy McSquigums, joined by Cupogoodness and a Tiny Disaster way over there. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Hi, Missy. Bye, Trusty Brothers. Thanks for tuning in.